two of my passions. One is history, and the other is women empowerment. And as part of so many organizations where we are working to empower women, you're always looking at features and qualities. What are the things that you can do which would help them reach a better position in life or give power in their hands, which is what empowerment means. Um, so I was actually commissioned by Hachette to write this book. And when I started looking for names, my first list that I made was more than 100 women rulers. Now, I think very few of us are aware that we have had so many women rulers. And this is just a preliminary list. You see, first thing is we have to think of India as a continent and not as a country. So you're really looking at many, many, many kingdoms. It's not that you've had a ruler for one kingdom. Now, it was a hard job for me to choose 20 out of them. Um, One criteria I set was that these women should have been directly ruling and not the power behind the throne. So, directly ruling either as regent or, where the children are small, or as a crowned head. The only exception I have made in this is Noor Jahan, who was who I think, though she was indirectly ruling through Jahangir, in my opinion, she may be the single most powerful woman ruler ever anywhere in the world in terms of the territory she controlled and in terms of the revenue. Queen Victoria had a larger territory for sure, but she was a constitutional ruler. She was not taking the decisions. Here, Noor Jahan was taking the decisions, the governorships, so many of the laws, they had her signature. So I have included Noor Jahan, though she doesn't fit my criteria. Now, the other thing was when I was telling the story is that not all women are good and not all women are bad. There is enough variation in their characteristics, in their lust for power, in the things they are prepared to do to get and retain power, just like men. So, one thing we have to realize is that women vary as much as men do. And it was very important for me not to write hagiographies, that you have to show those pictures, what's and all, and whatever they did. And it doesn't, to make a woman somebody to look at from whom you can learn something, they don't have to be perfect the same way that men don't have to be perfect to be admired for their various qualities, right? You can say this quality is not okay, but you can admire them for their other qualities. Were they good rulers if you compare them with male rulers at that time? uh, some were better, some were worse, some were as good. And this, for example, Ahilyabai Holkar's Indore in the 18th century was the best governed state in India at that time. But you have had rulers who were not as good. Um, the one thing which was certainly common is that it was a struggle for them to get power, to get to that stage of ruling. And since it was an exception, there were no normal pathways. So it was much more of a struggle for them than. The other thing I'd like to share is that really none of those rulers, all the rulers came up because of family connections. Either they were the daughter or the wife or the daughter in law of somebody. We don't really have a story about a woman who started out from scratch, got together an army, conquered the kingdom, which you have some few stories. Of course, most of the male rulers also got their throne because of inheriting it from somebody. So, what I would like to talk today is that when I went through these stories, being a management student and somebody who also looking for techniques, I realized that there are certain patterns. Of course, there are exceptions to the patterns, but there are certain commonalities in the lives of these women. And I have uh, women right from the 6th century, 7th century AD till the 19th century. I didn't go in for 20th century politicians. I basically restricted myself to rulers. Um, there are patterns. And when you look at these patterns and how they influence their rise to power and how they helped, the certain things that they did, how it helped them to hold on to power, I realized that many of these things are still applicable. I think this is something we can still learn for. Of course, in in India, and there are many Indias. So you have an India which is as modern and as liberal and as anywhere in the world, and then you have an India which a historian once said that in India you can see people living the life of all ages of mankind. There are people who are living the hunter gatherer lifestyle. There are people who are living Neolithic agricultural lifestyles. There are people who are living medieval lifestyles. And there are people who are living 21st century lifestyles. So I think there are learnings which can be something which we can look at our families, as well as if we are working in the sphere of women empowerment. This is something to look at. So I'd like to share the screen. Okay. So is the screen visible? Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Okay. This I've talked about. Uh, like to paint portraits, warts and all, patterns exist, so do exceptions. Now, the first point I would like to talk about is that all these women, due to various reasons, had exceptional educations. They had educations which were not like the other women in their families or neighborhoods or whatever. And that helped them to get to power and it helped them to hold on to power. Which is not to say all of them were educated. Qudsiya Begum, for example, of Bhopal, I don't know how many of you are aware, but Bhopal was ruled by four successive women rulers over a period of 100 years. And the first one who came into power, Qudsiya Begum, she was not educated at all. But more or less, if you see, and here I'm just giving you some examples. Um, so, Jhansi Ki Rani, now she was from a very poor background, and there was, there's no way she could have got educated the way she had. But her father was a tutor for the Peshwa's children and his family. And since Jhansi Ki Rani, she was Manu in those days, since she didn't have a mother, she would just hang about the with the other students, and in the process, she got a prince's education. And because she had that kind of education and she was exceptional, the king of Jhansi got married to her, and then she was able to apply a lot of her thinking and education in her future. The other So I'll be talking about these properties and illustrate it with a couple of stories and anecdotes about each uh, thing, which lesson that I feel is important. This is a portrait of Rudrama Devi. Now, Rudrama Devi was the daughter of the king of Warangal in the 13th century. She, the king just had three daughters, and instead of making a nephew the ruler, she was the youngest. He did a yagya called a Putrika Yagya and designated her a son from that day, and then gave her a son's education. So she even came to the throne as her coins and all say Rudradev. But she got married, then finally her grandson ruled after her, not her daughters. But she was a warrior queen, and then, as I said, she had a man's education. This third picture is of Sikandar Jahan, who was the second Begum of Bhopal. Her mother had come into power, and again she gave her a man's education, a warrior's education plus statescraft. And if any of you ever get the opportunity, and it's available online on archive.org and sites like that, should read Sultan Jahan, who was the fourth Begum of Bhopal. You should read her memoirs, the kind of education they went through. And it's a very fascinating period and something I would like to recommend. So, the first thing, as I said, while an education is not 100% necessary, an exceptional education and studying the statecraft always helps in uh, getting power and holding on to it. Um, the second thing is they all had champions in their family. They didn't just come up on their own. Razia Sultan had Iltutmish, who considered her the best of his children. She had four brothers, and he wanted to leave the throne to her. Ahilyabai Holkar, she was a poor villager's daughter. Malharrao Holkar, who was the king of that area, saw her one day, and there was something about her demeanor which really pleased him. He married her off to his son. The son was not quite all there. So uh, Malharrao focused on educating Ahilya to run the kingdom. So again, as I said, she got a prince's education. Kittur Rani Chennamma, now, this was her husband who gave her the power. He would be off fighting battles, but she's the one who would run the state. Championing the women in your family, giving them opportunities, giving them education makes all the difference in where they reach. Which is not to say that people cannot achieve things without champions, but there is a huge role. If you see the evidence, it makes all the difference in where people reach. Um, they all had experience. When they came to power, except I said a couple of exceptions like Qudsiya Begum, when they came to power, before they came to power, they had already been involved in administration, they had already handled posts. And that, when the moment came, when there was a choice, when there was an opening, when there was a choice between them and somebody else, they not only had the education, but they also had experience of governance. And that again helped them become better rulers and help them get the post, the throne. This is something which I would like to talk about in maybe slightly greater detail. They, when if you see the history of women rulers, the minute they come into power, they're perceived as weak. So there is normally immediately there is internal rebellion and external attack by the neighboring kingdoms, because they think, okay, this is an opportunity, we are going to get the power. This is their, each one of those rulers experienced it. And typically the nobility would feel that maybe one of them should be the ruler and not the women, so they would not get the support they wanted from the traditional nobility. uh, so they would typically look outside. They would create support groups from people who would otherwise not have a chance of power, so that they could, those people would be loyal to them. So here I'll give you an example. You have Didda, who was the queen of Kashmir in the 10th century, and she was quite a strong queen. She was the British used to call her the Catherine of Kashmir, based on comparing her with Catherine the Great of Russia, because she was similarly, she was extremely manipulative. She used to make her favorites the chief minister. She would raise them up, and when she got tired of them, she would throw them down. But she ran a very tight ship. Some of the people she raised were people like Shepherd, people who would never get a chance at power otherwise. So they were totally loyal to her. If you look at Rudrama Devi, if you see the number of people who had land, if you see the profile of the people who had land at the beginning of a reign and at the end of a reign, studies have been done, they find there is maybe 20-30% new entrants, soldiers who had never got land before, who she inducted. Did the women rulers look to women to create additional support groups? Some of them did, some of them didn't, because most of them were just trying to survive, to have the energy to put into women empowerment. One exception, I would say, is the Rani of Jhansi. We know of her as a person who fought the British. Now, that is, I think, a small part of what she did. When she got power, and she didn't get it for very long, because there was a very brief time between the time she ruled and by the time she was defeated by the British, she totally overturned the way that city ran. She involved mm, people from communities like uh, potters, people of the. She created a women's regiment. One of her best gunners was a lady called Motibai Natakwali, who used to be in, her husband was very fond of theater and she was part of the troupe. So for Jhansi Ki Rani, a lot of the folk thing says that if the Rani touched a piece of a clod of earth, it would become gold. She had that ability to take people from all sorts of background and involve them and get a lot of things out of them. So this is something. This is story of Rani Velu Nachiyar. I think few people would have heard of her. She was a queen of a small kingdom called Shivganga in Tamil Nadu, and her kingdom was attacked and taken over by the British. Her husband was killed. She managed to escape with her daughter and reach Hyder Ali, cross the border into Mysore and reach Hyder Ali. I'm talking about the 1780s. Um, so Hyder Ali gave her refuge, and he had just signed a treaty with the British. He said, "Next time, if we have a war, I will help you." So for many years, she was there. She created and trained a battalion of women, and she made a Dalit woman, Kuili, the head of that battalion. So when the Hyder Ali, when the second Mysore war began, Hyder Ali crossed over into Tamil Nadu. She went with him and she went with her troops to her own small kingdom. They got into there was the Shera celebration happening. So they disguised themselves, got into the Shiv Ganga, and then they attacked the British, and they were losing because the British had better ammunition. Then this Quayle drenched herself in oil, put herself on fire, and ran into the ammunition dump. So that dump exploded, and then they were able to regain their kingdom. All the stories that we hear about the women warriors, people fighting against the British, normally end in the defeat of the person. This is one person who won. She actually got back her kingdom, then they did a treaty and she kept it. And so here, this is an example of a woman who did support other women. Um, the other thing is that a lot of them, the kind of decision making they did, they often used a kind of lateral thinking, which was slightly different from the way men would have probably thought. I'll just give one example of Ahilyabai. Now, after her husband died, then her father-in-law died, then she was ruling as a regent on behalf of her only son. When the son got ill and he died, she had a daughter who wasn't married. So a lot of people were recommending that she adopt somebody and that person could be the ruler. But Ahilyabai said, there is no reason why I cannot be the crowned head. I've been running the government for the last 20 years. There is no reason a woman cannot be the crowned head. So there was a lot of resistance, including from her old time minister, who was actually otherwise very supportive. So they wrote to the now they were basically, the way the Maratha Federation worked is that they were notionally the governors of these districts, and they all owed fealty to the Peshwa. So this minister wrote to the Peshwa's uncle. The Peshwa was a minor at that time, Raghunath Rao, and said that why don't you come and take back Indore as a direct rule under the Peshwa. Now his troops, this Raghunath Rao came with 50,000 troops to take back Indore. Ahilyabai, first of all, didn't have so many troops, and in any case, they were deep south fighting some battle at that time on part of the Maratha Confederation. How did she handle it? So she wrote off to all the other Peshwa Sardars. She used to keep a very good PR relationship and regularly write to all the other rulers. She saying that this is happening. She called back her own troops, but she had to hold off Raghuba until the succor came. So she got together 500 women, widows from her kingdom, and sort of taught them to sit on a horse and wave about a sword. In 2 3 days, that's about all you can do. You can't teach them to be warriors. And then those women, and she sat on an elephant, put in armor, and she got together bow and arrow and all, and she came and camped on the other side of the Shipra. And she sent a message to Raghunath Rao that we, the widows of Indore, have come to fight you. So fight with us. If you win, you will have, you will have opprobrium all over. And if you lose, you can just imagine the kind of badnami you will get. So meanwhile, that Raghuba had started getting letters from everybody. What are you doing? Ahilyabai's nephew Tukoji Holkar, his troops were reaching. So finally, he sent a message that I have come to condole on the death of your son. So she said, "Oh, you're most welcome. Please come into Indore, leave your army behind." And then he came. You know, he was treated as an honorable guest for 1 month, and then he left, and she got the direct rulership. So it's a uh, you see that if this is something again I've seen with women rulers across, they would go to war, but war as a last option. They would first try to figure out some way of resolving that situation without actually going to war. Um, Another example I would like to share with you of somebody who really thought differently, and very unusual story. So I came across the name of this ruler when I'd gone on holiday near Almora. I found a little folk book, and then I researched it, and I found that this Rani Karnavati of Garhwal has been written about quite extensively by a lot of foreign travelers like Bernier, Tavernier, who were there in Aurangzeb's time. She's well documented. So, this Rani Karnavati was the ruler of the small kingdom of Garhwal with its capital in Srinagar. Not the Kashmir Srinagar, but the Srinagar, which is a little way from Rishikesh. Um, she Now her neighboring ruler told Shah Jahan that this kingdom doesn't belong to you. If you give me 30,000 troops, we'll conquer this kingdom for you. So Shah Jahan said okay, and he sent them under a Mughal nobleman and the neighboring king, and they came to attack her. Now, the thing about this is that the fighting season is very small because the snows melt around April, and then the rains come by July. So they just have 2 3 months in which you can really. The terrain is so difficult that you can only fight in those 2 3 4 months. So the Rani managed to delay the troops, and finally they got trapped in a defile with no food. These troops got trapped, and then they sent a message to her for terms. And she said, "Yes, you can go. I will not kill you, but I will cut off the noses of all these troops." So the 30,000 noses were cut off, and including the commanders. And then they went back to Shah Jahan, which, literally nak katake, they came back. And can you imagine the Mughal emperor's fury at his trips? Of course, India had nasal reconstruction, so I think most of them would have had, we've had proper good nasal reconstruction for 2,500 years, practiced in the villages as well. So I'm sure a lot of those noses would have got reconstructed. However, she got named Nakati Rani, and she was known as Nakati Rani for, in Mughal purposes. They were never able to conquer her. Aurangzeb sent troops 4 times. Shah Jahan gave up. I think he just didn't want to. He wanted to build his Taj Mahal. He didn't want to get involved in petty hill fighting. But that's certainly a very, she. I think we don't know about her. the third picture here is of Rani Abbakka. I think many of you have now heard of her because she's being, a lot of shares and story of about her are being shared. She was the queen of a small kingdom of Ullal in near Mangalore, and she was so it's not just Rani Abbakka was not just one queen. There were at least two of them who were related, and you have so at least the main story is that in 1618 she the Portuguese were blocking the seas, right? They were not allowing any trade by anybody unless you took a pass called a cartas from them. But she wanted to trade directly with Arabia because she was a pepper producer and she had a good market. So it was always a game of hide and seek, and then the Portuguese burnt one of her ships, which was returning with a lot of wealth, and she decided to take revenge. So in the night, she and a lot of her fishermen, she didn't even have that much of an army, it's just like a very small kingdom, sneaked into the space where the Portuguese fleet was there with fire arrows and mashals made of coconuts, and they burnt the fleet. This is just a few years after the Armada. The fighting, and Portugal was under Spain. So this is an equivalent of the Armada, which our Indians did, using just fire arrows and just stealth. And she became famous all over the Indian Ocean because this Portuguese fleet had been bullying everybody. So this picture that you see is actually an illustration from a book travelogue of an Italian traveler called Pietro della Valle, who actually who traveled to India. He'd gone to meet Shah Abbas, who was the ruler of Iran at that time. And then he told him, I'm going to India. So he said, you must go and meet this Rani Abbakka. I'd like to know what she's like, because what a task she has done. So he actually found her and he came and met her and he wrote about her. Um, okay. So, as I said, they were typically the women, though they did war, they were typically deal makers to a greater extent. Here, I'd like to talk a little bit about Chand Bibi. I think a lot of us have heard about her and the fact that she fought Akbar and held her fort. But that was something which was right at the end of her life. Before that, she had been the regent of Bijapur because she had been married to the king of Bijapur, and then um, his nephew became the king. She didn't have any children, so she was the regent for many years, 5 7 years. And I think I was just looking at her period, and this is about the same time as Queen Elizabeth was ruling in England. Now, if you compare, um, Chand Bibi ruled a greater population. The population had a higher per capita income. So she actually controlled and ruled a kingdom larger than Queen Elizabeth the First. All of us have heard about Queen Elizabeth. A lot of Indians have not heard about Chand Bibi, let alone people in the rest of the world. Now, she was a person who was very good at resolving and, you know, conflict. If you see her rule in Bijapur, and later she went back to her parental kingdom of Ahmednagar, and she was ruling as a regent for her nephew there. So that story, if you see how she was resolving, how she would manage to, and these Deccan sultanates were continuously warring against each other. So you have to be amazingly skilled to do that. And even the attack by Akbar's forces in 1595, it was finally resolved by getting a treaty. So almost you can say there have been no Akbar more or less never lost any battle. It was never that he set out to conquer something and he would lose that battle. This is the exception, that they managed to get a treaty without having to surrender. Um, Another interesting person was Begum Samru. Begum Samru was a dancing girl in Chowdi Bazaar in the 1700s. A Austrian soldier of fortune called Reinhard, whose nickname was Somber because he was of very dark visage, came there and he picked her up and made her his concubine and later married her. He used to have a troop of 4,000 mercenaries with about 100 European officers. And they would be there for hire. So, to the Mughals, to whoever wanted to hire them. And they were very efficient. So they managed to get a little Jagir of Sardana near Meerut. When Somba died, she became the head of that little kingdom. And so she actually had a mercenary troop and she used to command 100 European officers. She was about 4 feet 10, but she was extremely successful. And she was so successful that people used to think she's a witch. So I have actually been to Sardana. She'd become Christian. I've been to Sardana. There is a very nice cathedral which is still operational. She invited Italian architects. So they built her this cathedral, they built her a villa, and they built her a villa in Delhi opposite the Red Fort, which is now Bhagirath Palace. If you go and you see the images of, just Google and see what Bhagirath Palace, it's actually a Italian style villa with Corinthian columns and whatnot. She even got a statue of hers carved in mm, Italy from and which came by ship to Calcutta, then up the Ganga, and then by bullock cart to Sardana, which you can see the statuary. That's a fantastic thing. I Okay, I just finish with this. I'm skipping a bit because I think I'm reaching my time limit. So the other thing that you see is that the women rulers typically had a focus on welfare as opposed to spending money and time on warfare. Uh, this is, I think, during the pandemic, all of you must have read about countries which had women leaders and how they much better handled the pandemic. I mean, this is something you would have seen articles on it all the thing. Um, perhaps it's simply because you're not focusing so much on warfare or new conquest. Um, I'm giving examples here of, here is Sultan Jahan Begum. Now, Bhopal is one of the first countries to get pipe water, princely states, and the spend that they did on public good. Um, Travancore, I've not put the picture, but in Travancore, they were the first people to offer primary education on such a wide level. Uh, the middle picture is that of Mangammal, who was the queen of Madurai in the 17th century. She focused on highways, highway building. So almost they say every town in Tamil Nadu will have a road called Mangammal Sarani still. Uh, this picture is of Rani Durgavati. We know of Rani Durgavati as somebody who again battled Akbar and lost. But she ruled for 20 years and she was known for her irrigation projects and the number of tanks she built to solve the problem in her kingdom of Gondwana. So, these are some of the lessons. I'd like to talk about a couple of uh, exceptions. You have people like Tarabai. Normally, I said people wouldn't go out and attack. But Tarabai, who is from Maharashtra, who basically ruled after the death of her husband Raja Ram till Sahu came back for 7-8 years, she led the Maratha resistance. So she was, for example, one of her strategies to fight with Mughal troops was, it was not just defensive. She actually sent out offensive troops into Malwa and established Mughal states like which were never part of the Maratha Shivaji's kingdom, and established revenue collection uh, posts out there, and so that was. I'm giving an example because mostly all these women fought defensive warfare when they did. She was actually a person who went into offensive and acquiring new territory and whatever is regarding that. So just to summarize, I've come to the end of my talk. Uh, there are all these, I've discussed about 5 or 6 things that we see which were common amongst various women rulers. And I think many of them still hold true for if we are working for women empowerment today. It's important, the education is important, the championing is important. It's important to look outside for women who are trying to do it, to create your own support groups. And it's also important to build on what are considered traditional women's strength about getting along with people, about deal making. So this is, thank you.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Garodia. Thank you. I'm sure you'll take some questions.
Yes, of course.
Wonderful. SV, shall we start with you?
Yeah, Frami. First of all, fantastic speech, Archana Garodia. I've of course seen you on the KBC program, and I knew you are an encyclopedia of knowledge. But hearing you today was amazing. I mean, hats off. Lots and lots of information. Uh, just a suggestion, more than a couple of suggestions, more than a question, if you don't mind my indulgence.
Sure.
The three major presidencies of the British, Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay, all three of them had women connections. Bombay, all of us know because Bombay came as a dowry from the Portuguese to the British. But whether it was Fort St. George or Fort William, if my little bit of knowledge of history is right, I think Sir Francis Day or somebody in Madras, he fell in love with a lady whose village was close to Fort St. George, and that's how Fort St. George was located. And similarly in Calcutta, Fort William, again there was a lady who was going to go on to Sati, and a British officer fell in love with her, and that's how Fort William resided. I thought I will. I mean, I don't know whether you kind of agree with this or not. Uh, just one other point I wanted to say, not about all the great women you mentioned about, though it was nice to hear about you talking about Shivganga, because my maternal great grandmother is from Shivganga, and not very many people know about the rich history of Shivganga. I've been there, incidentally. Uh, Akbar almost lost his first battle with Hemu, the famous battle of Panipat. And Hemu was winning, and then Hemu was on a horse, on an elephant, and a stray, I think, arrow hit Hemu on his eye. Hemu fell down, and the whole battle changed, and history would have been different. I thought I'll just make these observations. Anything you have to add to that, I'll be more than happy.
Yeah, I certainly Job Chanok married the Sati, right? I've actually in Calcutta, you can go and see his memorial, the founder of Calcutta.
Right.
Madras, I'm not, I mean, the story is there, but it may be apocryphal. I'm not sure about the authenticity of the story. Hemu had 30,000 troops, and the Mughals had about 5 or 6,000. And that was not a battle they were winning. So it was just this. And here, actually, I'd had occasion to speak to an engineering college in Panipat. So I had analyzed, I said learnings from the three battles of Panipat, which was an interesting talk. I don't think I only gave that once. But basically, he had not bothered to create a kind of a succession plan. As a person, he should have, people should have been sure, okay, if not Hindu, then we still have a leader, and they may not have run away at that point. So this was, I think, a learning for all of us that you have to see, not only should there be a succession plan, but all the people who are working for you should know what it is, so that you don't have this kind of, confusion and battles lost.
Sorry, just a quick this thing. It's not apocryphal as far as the Madras one is. It's referred by Dalrymple in the book as well. In the Anarchy, he is referred to it. Anyway, but thanks again very much. I really appreciate, and I would like to hear about these three battles of Panipat. That's something I would love to do. I'm a history student even now.
Thank you. Priyasri, you have a question?
Yes, hi Archana Didi, welcome to our
Hello,
room.
pleasure to be here.
Okay, so I have a question. What is what according to you is the changing definition of what feminism was and what it is in our century?
Okay, so I think that traditionally, if you're looking for rights for women, it's been a long and hard battle over the centuries. If you see some of the people who fought in India, I'll talk about India, maybe worldwide,
So,
we
Jangir, you
also
have to
had a movement
send
for
the
women's
ticket to the.
rights. So, if you see the Brahmo movement, the Bengal Renaissance is one place where there was a lot of. So you were just looking for, okay, ban sati, the right not to die, widow remarriage. You were looking for very basic rights. And there was also a struggle for women's education. But the way women's education was imparted to women and very liberal Brahmo households, you still had a view that what an education does for a woman is to make her a Sakhi, Sumata, Sugrihini. Means you become a better housekeeper, you become a better mother, and you become a better companion. But you still did not have much concept of equality. Here, I'd like to share the name. You can read about her. I didn't cover her in my book because she's not a ruler. There was this lady called Rukaya Sakhawat Hussain, who was in Bengal at the turn of the century. And she is one person who spoke up at that time that women's education and the right of women to work and all is not about so that the family is better. Or people say, oh, if a woman is not happy, her family should will not be happy, so she should be happy. See, it's not about that. It's about her right to be happy and not about how it influences other people around her. So that itself was, you had moved from banning sati and fighting for property rights to saying that a woman can have her rights as any other person. You have a right to pursuit of happiness. So now today, I think when you're looking at feminism or women's rights, you're now looking at equality and not just a few rights. But then it's always step by step.
One more thing, like, if you look at our, I wouldn't call it mythology, but I would call our religious texts of Draupadi and Sita. They were such powerful women. And I think they were more, they were more progressive. Then, you spoke about the time when there was a sati happening. And then, I just see like a kind of like a merry-go-round that it's going round, and they were so much more progressive then. And then what happened that suddenly women were not treated or not considered to be an equal, because I can only go back to my text and speak about it.
I'm saying if we do tend to have an impression that in ancient India there was no parda or women were equal, I think maybe the only time you would have seen some kind of equality would have been when we were hunter gatherers, tribal, that type of lifestyle. There you would still see, if you see historically, there you would see this kind of equality. But if you're talking about the Vedic period or the Puranic period that we talk about, yes, they probably did have more rights and autonomy in comparison to, say, the late medieval period or even 16th, 17th, 18th century. But we must, Sita was put through a Agni Pariksha, right? And I don't know, I was actually reading the Valmiki Ramayana. So normally we just read some interpretation or somebody's version of it. But I thought it's important to read the original text. So I was sitting and reading the Valmiki Ramayana without abridgment. And at the point where when Sita, after the battle is won, Ram tells Sugriv that please, tells Vibhishan, please get Sita. So he says, you mean you want her to come out here in the public? So they did have a notion that women don't really come out in the middle of the armies on the battlefield. So Ram said it's all right. In Apatkal, it is all right for women to come out in public. So that is something I learned, that otherwise it was not quite the thing. Then when the palki came, it was stopped a little distance from Ram, and she he told Vibhishan, ask her to walk to me the rest of the way. So when she came out, all the Vanars and the soldiers were crowding to see her. You know, they'd fought this great battle for her, they had seen her. And when they were crowding to see her, Vibhishan's, guard started pushing back the people. And then again, Ram said, it's all right, let them see. And when she came up to him, he said that I have now rescued you and, redeemed the honor of my family. You are now free to go wherever you like. And she said that, where am I wrong? What have I done wrong? And then she says that nothing happened to me. And then she says, even if something had happened to me, it was, my body was not in my control, only my mind was in my control. So even if something had happened to me, I'm not guilty of anything. But then the Agni Pariksha was still done. And this is the original Valmiki Ramayana. And also remember in this, when the jewelry is found, and Rama asks Lakshman that, do you recognize the jewelry? And he says, I can only recognize the payal and the feet jewelry because I never looked up, so I would not recognize the earring. So we should not have this illusion that things were equal. But at that time, the author had the thought that Sita will say that it doesn't matter, my mind is my thing. And, that is a very progressive thought which was there at that time. So it's quite, if you look, it's an interesting picture of the times.
Thank you.
Swati, you have a question?
Yeah, hi Archana.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I must say that she was the perfect chairperson of the Flow National, and the amazing event she did in her year were all real women empowerment. Okay, what I want to ask, one is, what all you read when you won that BBC Mastermind? Because the questions must be like crazy. And second is that everybody keeps saying that women empowerment, and they also say that it is the men who really need to be empowered to accept that the woman is equal, and it is always they who decide that she should do this or she shouldn't do this. So what do you say about this?
Okay. So, one, in terms of my reading, you can't go for a quiz. You can't prepare for these kind of general knowledge quizzes, right? Because it's so vast. So this is a product of, as I said, years of reading. As I said, I've read more or less a book a day all my life. So it's just, and television and things like that. And I was fortunate in that in my family, that there were never these rules imposed on us. You are a girl, so you should be in the kitchen, or you should be doing embroidery, or whatever girls are supposed to do. We were free to follow whatever passions we had. Because typically, if you see in families, men's spare time belongs to them, but women's spare time belongs to their family. And I was fortunate growing up that those rules were not imposed on me. Regarding the second question, where you said, is it men are the people who decide? Of course it's men and women both who have to look at these issues of which are unfair or discriminatory. And I would here like to say that if you see the Bengal Renaissance, all these changes were led by men. They were the people who were putting in the energy and who were fighting for widow remarriage, for banning of sati, for education. And I would even like to say, for something like the Civil War in the US and the emancipation of the slaves, do the blacks fought a bit, but it was fought by white men who were standing up for righteousness versus other white men. So we do see there are a lot of people who fight for justice and righteousness who are maybe not directly affected by it. It's not only the people who are being, it's something which is there through history and across the world. So, of course, and there are plenty of men who support this,
But those rules also are made by them, and then they only help to solve those rules, get over those rules.
Well, it's a little controversial, but I just like to say that the status of women essentially is changing because it's because of contraception and a higher life expectancy of women. Earlier, if you would see the history and the data and all is there, an average woman would be more or less pregnant or lactating for her entire life, for her entire fertile period. And so they really would not have any time to do anything else except look after the children. After you people started getting two children and the state has come into the picture to help with childcare and all, that's when women have had the time to get into it. And you see, if you look at actually the economic, what percentage of political, what you call the gender gap index, what political power you have, what economic power you have, and what social and other educational power you have. You can see the graph starting from as the adoption of contraception has happened. You can see this graph attached to it.
Yeah, that's a great observation.
Ms. Garodia, we have time for one more question, if it's okay with you.
Sure.
SV?
Yeah, first of all, I think that comparison with contraception was brilliant. And in fact, even Mumtaz Mahal, I think she died hardly
Yes.
when less than
14
40.
delivery.
14 children,
Yeah.
14 pregnancy.
Crazy, my question was slightly different, actually. My question was that you mentioned about having read Valmiki, and since you've read Valmiki Ramayana, my question was that you, of course, referred to Valmiki talking about Sita talking about her mind, which is a very good observation. But what about the fact that Kaikeyi went to battle with Dashrath, and the battle was won because of Kaikeyi, because of which she got the two boons, and then Ram was, banished and, sent to the forest. You have to say about that. Is that not some form of women emancipation?
Yeah, so I'd like to say here that if you see that period of time, you had certain kingdoms which were more hierarchical and where you had kings, and then you had these tribes which were, they would have elected kings, they would be more egalitarian, and a lot of these tribes were there in the northwest. So Kaikeyi is there in Punjab. Madra and Kaikeyi and Gandhar and all are in that region, and they typically had the women would be more, they had more egalitarian society, not only in terms of men and women, but also in terms of rulers. So they would have elected rulers, and the king would be more of a first among equals rather than, a divine right. This is something when Alexander had come. So there are these Greek chroniclers who've written, and I think they fought with a tribe called the Ashwak somewhere. I'm not remembering which exact, but I think they called them Asikanoi, or I think it's the Ashwak. And they said when they were under threat and there was a group of people, I think the women picked up the swords and fought along with the men. So this is something which is historical. It's not just from the epic, but this is something that the Greeks recorded, that they did see women fighting. I don't know whether I should bring this up, but again, Karn was the mama of Nakul and Sahdev was Shalya, who was the king of Madra. So
Yes.
Madri was from Madra, was basically tricked and forced into becoming the charioteer for Karn in the final battle. And you have a dialogue. So I read the Mahabharata, I read that original dialogue in that. And he is trying to criticize, basically, he's trying to do a kind of psychological warfare with Karn, because he's basically on the side of the Pandavas. And Karn, in return, starts criticizing Madra, which is you are from Madra. And he talks about the fact that the women behave freely and they even drink. And, he talks about, for him, it is a criticism that the women behave freely and do what they like in Madra. Madra is right next to Kaikeyi in ancient India.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That is very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garodia. That really was interesting and quite educative too.
Thank you for
Thank
inviting
you.
me.
Thank you
I
very
enjoyed
much.
myself.
Satyan, may I please request you to give the official vote of thanks?
With pleasure, Fali. Archana ji, that was truly a fascinating presentation. You gave us a refreshing perspective on the women rulers of India and shared some enthralling trivia and anecdotes. We all have thoroughly enjoyed traveling through time with you and the great women rulers of India. And as a token of appreciation for spending this afternoon with us, we will be lighting up a rural household using solar power. And we will also share the
Wonderful.
certificate shortly with you.